How's it going, guys? It's Cole from See-Through Panel showing off The Shadow over Innsmouth adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's original story by Go Tanabe. It's either Gu Tanabe or Go Tanabe. I think it's Go. Published by Dark Horse in this paperback edition and retailing for $30 US. I already have his 2-volume set of The Mountains of Madness and The Hound and Other Stories. So I've read those before. This is the newest one and the one I've been really excited to read. I will not be spoiling anything too big. It's a really old story. It's a classic. If you haven't read it, read that. I actually never read the prose myself. I read literally every other story by Lovecraft in his complete works, but I never read The Shadow over Innsmouth. I just never got around to it. This is the only version I've read, but I've discussed with my friend who's a huge fan and who enjoys the original story immensely and told me kind of the differences that we could glean. So I'll go over that, but I'm going to just spoil only stuff by showing art. I'm not going to be spoiling too much. So first off, this is a manga, but there are color pages, but it's traditionally in black and white most of the way through. As I said, this is an adaptation of the story by H.P. Lovecraft, who was a despicable person with despicable views, but separating art from artist. I really enjoy his work. It's some of the finest horror prose I've ever read. I just think it has a very unique quality to it that separates it from the other kind of subgenres of horror. Lovecraftian horror is kind of its own thing now, and it's a genre I really love. The Shadow over Innsmouth is basically about our main character recounting his experience in this old town of Innsmouth, where things weren't really right. There were people that looked strange. Everyone tried to avoid it. The town was super decrepit, and kind of what goes on there and why, the reason why people avoid it, the reason why these people are strange. It's a Lovecraft story, you know. So obviously it starts with a man with a gun to his head. And Go Tanabe just draws the hell out of this. This is not a story that this is not a shonen manga. This is a slow, really exposition heavy, I guess, especially when it comes to Lovecraft. Story where the narrator talks a hell of a lot with internal monologue. There's a lot of dialogue, but luckily in this adaptation, which I think is one of the best adaptations I've read of a Lovecraft story, there's a lot to look at and to absorb other than just walls and walls of text and exposition and descriptions and things you don't care about, and the word cyclopean 45 times. But there's our main character right there, who will go unnamed. And I really don't have a lot to say about this because I don't want to spoil it, even though it feels weird to say that because it's such an old classic story. But look at this kind of alien-esque jewelry. I'll show you some of the most beautiful panels. How about that? That's kind of where things get nice. Because Go Tanabe, the allure of Lovecraft's work is that he talks about these nameless things that can't be described a lot, which makes it spookier when you're reading it. But in terms of a comic or a visual adaptation of any kind, like any visual medium, movies, TV shows, comics, that's not going to work. You have to show something, even if it's not the full picture, like in horror movies when the monster is in shadow so you don't see it, so it's a little creepier. You have to show something. And so Go Tanabe really works up to that, where he's showing us what the main character is imagining these things look like. And of course, to him, they're all myth. They're not real. But then by the end, obviously, things have kind of advanced a bit, and we're seeing the real deal. And here's a denizen of Innsmouth with the telltale Innsmouth look. So almost everyone in the town looks like that. Obviously, as I said, this is just such a slow Lovecraft story, so if you're not into these kind of building of suspense and this kind of world building almost, historical fiction aspect, you're not going to like it, but for me, it was just a page-turner. I really love that he goes through the entire lore and the history of this town, how it came to be the way that it is, various characters from the history of it and how they formed this place, the geography of it, and then obviously the twisted things that happen inside, like this guy. And so, yeah, I think first off, I just want to say well, not first off, getting this far in, I should probably have said earlier, Go Tanabe, I think, is the best to ever do it when it comes to Lovecraft adaptations. I think he is pretty much spot on with the way he edits the story, the way he changes just very minor things. The biggest complaint, as I said, my friend had read the original prose. His biggest complaint is that the ending is a twist ending, and it's not at all telegraphed in any way to make it seem planned or meaningful. And Go Tanabe changes that, because I said, what are you talking about? The ending is telegraphed in various ways throughout the book. And he said that's actually a change from this. So Go Tanabe realizes the flaws and some of the imperfections in Lovecraft stories, and he makes them a little bit more polished. And so, without having read it, I will say, from what I've heard, this is just a better version of the story. And obviously, they're not super comparable. One is prose, one is comics. If you're into the prose, the deep, deep, deep descriptions and the ridiculously long paragraphs of history, you're not going to get all of that here. You get a lot of it. But also, you need to take in the sights and the actual panels and the art to see what Lovecraft has described. Because Lovecraft, I'm assuming, described everything that we're seeing here, because he does that. But here, you're going to need to take in everything all at once. And so, it's a very interesting thing. The Hound and Other Stories and The Mountains of Madness are just two of the best Lovecraft adaptations I've ever seen. Alan Moore had a great take on the Lovecraft mythology, but he's never done a direct H.P. Lovecraft adaptation, and so I'm not going to put him in this argument, but this is still a better book than Neonomicon and Providence, in my opinion. And I love Providence, but in terms of a Lovecraft story, maybe not a better book. How do I want to say it? This is a more true, more classic Lovecraft story, just by nature, because it's a straight adaptation. And I've read a ton of adaptations, and a lot of them fall short because it's kind of an indie underground thing to want to adapt Lovecraft a lot of times. And so it's not done by the most practiced or high tier kind of, in the zeitgeist artists and writers. It's usually just pretty indie stuff, which is totally fine. But this is one of the most polished, well done, properly executed, and with good production Lovecraft adaptations. And let me show you that panel again, because it's insane. See, this book is really slow, but when the horror turns up, it really turns up. Let's get to some of the... There are color spreads in this, which I believe it says are from the original releases when this was in chapters. With direct quotes from the story. They kind of are really nice, because they kind of also do that thing I was talking about where they telegraph the ending. By putting these quotes in here, these quotes are actually from the ending of the book. But they telegraph really nicely what to expect, and kind of, without spoiling the ending, obviously, they would never do that, but without spoiling the ending, they make it more obvious what is occurring and how things will proceed. That's just a crazy panel. So when Go Tanabe decides to fully render things, that's what it looks like. Not as just typical fast, sleek style. He must really love to draw architecture and stuff like that, or else why would he ever do this? Because there's just a lot of shots of, like, broken down buildings, the insides of rooms, tons of shots of just the landscape of Innsmouth. And I noticed this, it never comes up in the book. Landscape shot. Those are some big birds. I feel like that might be another Lovecraftian entity, but maybe it's just a big bird. God, that's a weird one. But, yeah, I've been talking in circles. Close up on a door. It's just a glorious, glorious adaptation that I just really loved. I'm just going to keep flipping through it. Don't have a ton to add to it. Without spoiling everything, and I really don't want to. If you're not an H.P. Lovecraft person, you don't need to read the stories. Just read Go Tanabe's adaptations. Pick up The Hound and Other Stories, which is kind of more easily digestible because it's shorter form, but not his top work, I think. Then pick up At the Mountains of Madness, volumes 1 and 2. And I think they actually put it out in a all-in-one volume. There's the cover art. And then get this, because I think it works super well. You do not need to have ever read the original stories. And I think, he deserves a lot more credit. It's not really a... Lovecraft is talked about widely. It's not like an indie thing itself, but to adapt it into comic form, I think, is not done enough. And I love to see the representation of that. Definitely one of the best horror comics I think I'm going to read this year. And it just made me want to read more horror comics. This is when things just get crazy and every page is just batshit. The one thing is the gutter loss. We don't talk about the gutter loss. Digital is a good format. I won't ever say it's not worth getting digital. Yeah, so I've got not a lot more to say about that. I kind of just talked in circles. But if you're going to take anything out of it, best Lovecraft adaptations are done by Go Tanabe without any doubt. It's just always him every time he does it. And I know he's done more that haven't been published here in the US. And I want to read all of them, please. And I would like him to adapt literally every single Lovecraft story. That'd be awesome. There will actually be no haul video for May because I received my package like the second week of May and it had one paperback. So if you're watching this, this is my haul for May. It is The Singularity, a graphic novel by a ton of people. Namely, out of my favorites, Matthias Bergara, Ramon Perez, Rod Reis, or Reese, I'm not sure. There's a lot of names, there's a lot of names. And it's got some beautiful artwork in it. And it's just a collection of short stories linked together in the same world. Don't know what it is. Haven't read it. It's on my list, though. So that's probably all that's going to happen for the for the May shipment here. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you've got any recommendations for namely Lovecraft comics, or Lovecraft-ish, Lovecraft-adjacent horror comics, or any horror comics at all, I would love to get into a rhythm of reading some more horror because it's just one of my favorite genres in comics. When it's done well, it's just so chilling and wonderful to read. So thanks a lot, guys. Peace.